Hi, friends. Welcome to this week's installment of Lit Chats with Rae and Hadley.
Hello, everybody.
Today, we are going to be talking through the prompts for your essay that you will be writing this week. Also, later on Monday, there are various discussion breakout sessions that are happening. Different teachers are leading them. Each one is on a different prompt. So today, we're really just going to kind of give a basic overview of the prompts, but then really encourage you to attend one of those discussion sessions once you've decided which prompt you want to write to, so that you're able to get some deeper analysis and more insight into each prompt.
Yeah, this will also be a good video for you to come back to when you have landed on your prompt and kind of listen to us talk through some of the tips and hints for each of these individual prompts. So I'm going to read the kind of background information of the prompts before we go into the actual prompts for you all here. We have explored many of the themes and characters present in Of Mice and Men, as well as a variety of supplementary texts. Using what you have learned, you will analyze one or more of these works in its entirety and express your understanding through a literary analysis essay. For your essay, you will develop a thesis and support it using passages and examples from the novella. Your essay should contain no fewer than 4 quotations as evidence and should be analytical in nature. Be sure to include a works cited page and to follow MLA format. You'll be drafting the essay during this week, and your final draft will be due to turnitin.com by 11:59 p.m. on Monday, May 4th. So you have about a week to work on this. Any follow-up for that, Rae?
No, just something I want to point out there is be sure that you pay close attention to kind of the parameters of the assignment, which are usually in the invitation of a prompt. And those include MLA format, which you'll have a mini lesson on this week. Also that you have to integrate evidence. You have a mini lesson on that. It needs to be analytical in nature. You've got a mini lesson there. It's ruled by a thesis. There's a mini lesson there. So do please take advantage of all these mini lessons that we'll be pushing out this week, because they'll be really helpful. And please be sure that your works cited page is accurate, because some of you might be citing more than one work from the same writer. It's going to be really important that you do correct parenthetical citation, because Steinbeck is not enough to differentiate between Of Mice and Men and the Claire Luce letter, for example, or Hughes isn't enough to differentiate between Oppression, Dreams, and Harlem. So be sure that you are paying close attention to the mini lessons and that you are correctly citing your sources.
Good tip. All right, here's your first prompt, is your standard thematic analysis of Mice and Men. As we read John Steinbeck's classic novella, Of Mice and Men, we discussed many ideas that were central to the novella's theme. In your opinion, what is the primary theme or underlying message of the novella? Why did Steinbeck write it? What lesson does he want us to understand after reading his book? Miss Rae, I'm going to let you kick it off with this one.
Yeah, so theme, the first thing we need to remember is what is a theme. And it's important to recall that it's not just a topic. It's not just a motif. It's not just an idea. It contains the message. So it's the lesson that Steinbeck wants us to learn through reading this text. That's the novella's theme. So for example, love is not a theme. That is a motif. It could be a recurring idea or topic that exists throughout the text. However, the theme must contain the message about love. A really cliche one, for example, is love conquers all. Not the most beautiful theme, but at least contains a message. So you want to be sure those themes are universal and their reads on the motifs themselves. And there's so many motifs in this text that come up and that you can develop the message based on. Some of them are loneliness, companionship, the American dream, societal expectations and how they affect our reality. You can also look at racism in this text. You can look at the role of women in this text. There's just so much. The plight of the migrant worker, all sorts of motifs here that you can then take to develop into the message about the text, much like what we did when reading To Kill a Mockingbird. Think back to all those mini lessons. Think back to those discussions based around motifs. If something's coming up again and again, it's because Steinbeck's using that thing to make a point. And that point would be a theme, the message.
Yeah. So to kind of reiterate a specific one, because I get a sense that this is going to happen a lot. is someone writing a theme is the American dream in Of Mice and Men. So Miss Rae mentioned that as a motif because that is something that reoccurs in the story, but it is not in it of itself the theme of the story. What is Steinbeck saying about the American dream? You could also look at the treatment of Lenny, right, and mental disabilities, and kind of what all of those things are saying. Look back through last week's lessons on like parallels, irony, kind of all those things that we built through the novella to keep working on developing your theme. And remember that this is the central argument of your essay, is what is the meaning? What does Steinbeck want us to take away from it? All right, anything else on that one?
I think that hits it.
Sweet, here we go. Prompt number 2 is characterization. Of Mice and Men contains important literary characters who teach the reader various lessons through their development, or lack thereof development. Select a character from the novella and discuss their development throughout the text. What message is the author sending the reader through the direct and indirect characterization? So what do you think, Miss Rae?
So I guess to start, just discussing characterization itself. So if we're looking at the characterization of a character in a text, we look at not only what that character does and what they say and how they act, we also look at what other people say about them, what other people do to them, the effect they might have on others. So we really want to kind of be sure that we're looking at all aspects of a character if we're looking at characterization, as opposed to just one small thing. Like physical description is absolutely crucial to characterization, but that's not all there is to it. So you couldn't just write about Lenny being big. You need to dig a lot deeper. And there are so many fantastic characters in this text that help to teach us lessons, like why include crooks? Why have one black man who lives in a separate area of the farm, but who is literate and whose father's a farm owner? What's Steinbeck doing there? Why do we have this woman, Curly's wife, who we never even get to hear her name? And so much of what we learn about her until that conversation with Lenny is from the slanderous things that men say about her and the way people treat her. Why include a character like Lenny Smalls, who has this physical or this mental disability that prevents him from really gaining all the opportunity he should be able to? Why include a caretaker role in George? Why include Curly? And how is he so important in the text? All of these things, you want to think about the message that Steinbeck is portraying by including this character, and in looking at the way that that character develops and shifts, or in some cases, the way that character remains stagnant.
Yeah, every character in this novella is important. I know you, in your reading of chapter 1 3 weeks ago, talked a lot about how this was like a play. Mm-hmm. And how the scenes were all essentially like scenes in a play. And so that's a really important thing to think about when you think about characterization. Who's saying what and who is saying what about whom? But it's also every single character is important. The novella is so short that none of these characters are here by accident. So you don't have to write about George. You don't have to write about Lenny. You can choose crooks. I think that's a really fascinating character.
Candy too. Oh my God, the messages we learn through Candy.
Yeah. And characterization's a lot of fun for close reading. Mm-hmm. So like really think about what is being said about the characters and also how the characters are interacting with the other people. Like think about the way George is interacting with Curly's wife versus the way Lenny interacts with Curly's wife, and what that says about not just her, but what that says about both of them as mm-hmm. well. You really want to focus on all of those character interactions. Good. All right. Prompt number 3, social injustice. One of the most significant motifs in Of Mice and Men is social injustice. In many ways, the novella is an outcry against societal conditions that confine certain individuals to a life of loneliness and inequality. Select and describe 2 to 3 episodes from the book that portray societal injustices, and analyze how they are meant to convey a need for reform. If you would like to really challenge yourself, consider identifying similarities to social injustices you see in society today. All right, this is a really good one, and is right up Ms. Rae's alley.
True. It very much is. So this one, I mean, there's so much injustice that exists throughout the text. We see economic disparity and what that does to people. Injustice. We see the plight of being a migrant worker who has no one core area to call home. Injustice. We see the treatment of women. Injustice. The treatment of Black people. Injustice. The treatment of the mentally disabled. Injustice. So think about all these various things that we see in the text. Pick just one. That's the kicker. And then a couple scenes from the text, a couple moments that really help to highlight that injustice. And then that idea of making connections to today, that really provides, like those of you who are going to tackle this prompt, I encourage you to take on that extra challenge and make connections to today, because that's the thing about this novella, is that it is absolutely timeless. The messages that exist then and the injustices that existed then and the lessons that Steinbeck was trying to portray to the reader are all just still so important.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we're in a very specific moment for conditions of the worker.
Yeah.
Right? Like in this very specific moment, we're very much in that. I want to kind of key you all into something that Ms. Rae said, which is to pick one of those social injustices and find 2 or 3 instances in the text that you can expand upon that. What we don't want is 3 different social injustices, 1 paragraph of each one.
That would be so boring.
Because it also wouldn't provide any depth of those. If you can discuss an injustice in its entirety in 1 paragraph, it's probably not the right social injustice for you or for this book. And so if you're going to take on this prompt, which I think it's a great one, and I think there's a lot you can do with it, find a social justice cause that is of interest to you that you see in the book, because I think it'll allow you to better develop what the sense of that social injustice is. And especially if you kind of link it to something that's happening in our current world. Like if it's something you're actually passionate about, that'll be by far be the best essay. But we really want you to pick one of those social injustices.
Yeah. If you try to confront in this essay racism, sexism, and ageism, and then at that point you're trying to explain how this demonstrates Steinbeck's call for a need for reform, it's all going to be just so vague because you won't be able to dig deep enough into one of those things in under 1,000 words, right? You need to keep that word limit in mind. So pick 1 or 2 and go from there.
Because the only way you could do multiples is if you're writing like a
thesis.
Yeah, like a full-on master's thesis, and we're not here to read all of that. So we do want you to stay within that 750 to 1,000 word limit. Mm-hmm. All right, you ready for the next one?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Historical analysis of Mice and Men gives great insight into a tumultuous period of American history. In particular, the political, economic, and societal conditions of the Great Depression and pre-civil rights era are demonstrated throughout the novella. Select 2 or 3 episodes from the novella and explain their connection to this period in American history, making sure to also explain how the historical context helps to establish the novella's messages. So, Ms. Rae, what is something they're going to have to do if they decide to take on this prompt that maybe they didn't have to do in the first 3 prompts?
A little bit of outside research, but valuable outside research, right? We have to remember that books are written specifically for the time that they exist in, right? So Steinbeck had that context of what was happening in California and in America at that time, and came into approaching this text with that in mind. And so we really want to be sure that we take that historical context into account, because it's so crucial when it helps to inform what the writer is doing and why they're doing it. Especially when we have this like famous California author writing about California, as he so beautifully does. It's important that we look at those things. I would encourage you, if you're thinking of tackling this one, to go back to the week 1 overview presentation, that it was like the intro to Of Mice and Men presentation that broke down a little bit about the pre-civil rights era. We also looked at women and how they were treated. We also looked at the Great Depression and that migration that occurred with the Dust Bowl. So we want to look at all those things to pick some aspect of historical connection here.
One of the things I find really interesting about this is it's taking on a vitally important aspect of California, but one that people don't think about when they think of California, right? That kind of valley farming aspect. That's not something that when people think of California, that's not what they go to. But Steinbeck was writing a lot about those people in California and how important that plight was. And so I think that's a really, really good thing to look at. But you are going to have to do some outside research if you take this one on. And it's valuable. And I think it will enrich your experience with the novella to have some of that background information. It's like anytime I finish a book, one of the first things I do is Google things in the book, like around the time period and things that might have helped inform why this book was being written. And so it's kind of part of my natural tendencies as a reader. And hopefully you all start developing that sense as well, because it will really make so much more meaning for the book.
Yeah, context matters so much. Historical context matters so much. So this is a great prompt if you're interested in that specific aspect, or if you fancy yourself a bit of a history buff or interested in American history, this is a great one for you.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Number 5, psychological analysis of Mice and Men includes one of the most infamous characters in American literature, Lenny Smalls. As readers, we learn that Lenny suffers from a mental disability or illness. Complete additional research on this topic and provide a diagnosis. What is going on with Lenny Smalls and how do we know? What message is Steinbeck portraying through the inclusion of this character in the novella? So, Ms. Rae, I look at this topic and I think, one, this seems like really, really interesting, cool stuff to go through. 2, it also seems really creative. And 3, it seems really challenging. How can you help us break this down to make it seem a little less maybe intimidating, but still keep that like interesting and creativity to it?
Yeah, I think the first thing to remember is that when you're looking for sources, if this is what you are tackling, don't start with the DSM-5, right? Don't take the most inaccessible source that's, by the way, a book that has like all of the possible diagnoses that exist, but it's not written in language that is accessible to most of you, right? It's written for doctors. So make sure that you're looking for pieces of evidence and research that is appropriate for the context of what you're using it for, because you are not actually developing like a treatment plan and putting Lenny through any kind of treatment program or institution or medical kind of treatment. But what you are doing is you're looking at the symptoms, and the symptoms are the evidence in the text, the things he does, the things he says, the things others say about him. So we have that characterization aspect. Those are the actual symptoms. You use those symptoms to form that diagnosis, which is supported by your research. So don't just look at it once and say, well, it would make sense that he's schizophrenic. Could you find evidence for that? Absolutely. Could you find evidence that he suffers from borderline personality disorder? Yep. Dissociative identity disorder? Yep. Depression? Yep. Mental retardation? Yep. But you need to figure out, if you had to say one thing that's going on with him, what is it? And then you need to support that, not only with outside research, because in order to enhance our credibility, we need to be sure to cite our sources. None of us are doctors, so we can't just like throw out like a mom on Facebook, like it's schizophrenia. You have to be sure that you actually back that up with evidence, but then also really carefully look for the textual evidence that demonstrates the symptoms and how those symptoms tie. And don't forget the important piece that asks you what the message is through the inclusion of this character. It's such a great prompt. I'm really a big fan of it. And it's a type of essay I used to assign to whole classes of students, and I can tell you that it can produce some really interesting thinking and really great writing, and also open your eyes to some illnesses, disorders, and disabilities that you may not have previously known about. It helps to kind of increase your empathy as a human as well.
Yeah, psychological analysis of characters is also anyone out there who's interested in going into literature in college. This is a huge field of study. And as we grow to know more about the brain and the illnesses that exist, we can get more specific diagnoses. And there are all kinds of papers out there written about diagnosing specific characters with different disorders that I, in my college experience, found incredibly fascinating to read. But you really touched on an important part of that, which is, since we're not the experts the way we can be with like thematic analysis or characterization, the way to build the ethos is to make sure that the sources we're pulling from are good, and that they are clear, and they offer something sharp and dynamic in them, because that's going to help a lot in this topic. When I read that, I'm just like, man, this is so cool. This is such a cool topic to study. And Lenny he's not a dynamic character in the sense of like change, but he is a dynamic character in a lot of ways, and he's an interesting character. All right, we got one more here, and this is similar to number one in that theme, but the difference is it's doing a comparative analysis. So you're going to be looking at the poetry of Langston Hughes and the novella of Mice and Men, are both touted as classic works of American literature that are important to our understanding of our unique history and culture. These texts share many common themes. Select one and analyze the development of the theme from both authors. Your analysis should be comparative in nature. So before I throw this to you, I just want to say, one of the beauties of literature is you're talking about a Black poet from Harlem and a white novelist writing about California. They seem, on first glance, they couldn't be more disparate. They couldn't be more different. Yet, their texts, the ones we read, do have lots of commonalities in them. And you can use all three of the Langston Hughes poems, any of the three, all of them. They don't just have to be the two that you worked with. You can also use Oppression, the one that we showed you as an example. So, Miss Rae, what do you think?
I just think this is such an interesting prompt, because typically when students are looking at comparative analysis and using of Mice and Men, they look at something like To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Which, because they're so often read right next to each other. But I think that it's really important to engage in analysis of texts from writers that come from different backgrounds and through different avenues of communicating their message. So we have this novella from Steinbeck. We also have the letter, that Claire Luce letter from Steinbeck, and we have the poetry of Langston Hughes. So looking across mediums to develop messages, I think, can be really important. If you're tackling this one, I encourage you not to spread yourself too thin. Like, maybe don't try to look at all three poems in the book, because then, much like with that previous example of societal injustices, you're going to be really limited because you only have 1,000 words, so that your argument in that case would be vague and not super interesting in analysis or supported. So really try to key in on the most important stuff.
Yeah. And so, because I'm going to reiterate this again, dreams on their own are not a comparative theme for this, right? Like, what is Langston Hughes saying about dreams? What is Steinbeck saying about dreams? And how are they similar and how do they differ? When we're talking about comparative analysis, and we're getting into a Mr. Hadley issue here, I like that we call them comparative analysis and not compare and contrast essay. Comparative analysis is to look at how they're similar and different. So you can focus on both of them. We want to see what they're saying about them and how they're the same and how they're different. I think that's really important. And I think Ms. Rae gives you a really good point to not focus on all three poems, right? One thing I love about both Langston Hughes and in this, actually a lot of Steinbeck's work, not his other most famous work, Grapes of Wrath, but they're short. So you have to get meaning out of each word, especially with Hughes. You got to pull meaning from each word because there's so little words. There's so few.
An economy of language.
Yeah. Yeah, the economy of language that exists in both of those. I mean, Of Mice and Men is such a short novella. Even for a novella, it's short. Like it's really short. And then Hughes's poems are almost universally short. And so what does that say about their message also? Like looking at the text structures themselves, I think that's important. If you found yourself interested in the Langston Hughes poetry, I really suggest looking at this topic because it's a one that lets you kind of dive into that and still connecting it to Of Mice and Men. Any last thoughts or anything else you want them to know right off the bat for this week before we dive into all the other things throughout the week?
I think I lean on each other for feedback. Also lean on your teachers for feedback, and lean on people who aren't your teachers for feedback, right? It's very much like a High School Musical, we're all in this together moment of, you'll see that there's all these Zoom open drop-in conferences that are available throughout the week, and you'll notice that maybe there's a bunch from teachers that aren't your teacher. That doesn't mean that we're not still here to give you feedback and provide you feedback. It doesn't matter if you've ever sat in our classrooms before and like in a desk in our classrooms before. You're all still all of our students. So we really are taking a really collective approach here to help you all out with this writing process, seeing as how we are not physically there for you. We are still here for you. So keep that in mind, and don't be afraid of coming into a Zoom that is someone who is not your teacher. It's a great opportunity for you to get a different kind of feedback or a different perspective. You could get feedback from multiple teachers too, because we're not all the same people. We're going to give you different feedback and different styles of feedback. So take advantage of it. Take advantage of it. Really try this week. The reason all we gave you was that one discussion with the thesis statement and the fact that you're writing this essay and no other reading or work or formatives is because we want to be sure that you use your time wisely this week. Really try to make it so you don't just wait until Sunday to write this essay, because then you can't get feedback. That feedback happens from Monday through Friday, and then it's the weekend. Choose sanity. Hopefully your essay's done.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my takeaway message.
I think that's super important, the idea of feedback, and also getting feedback from different people. So, most of our freshmen have had an opportunity because of beginning comp to get feedback in the writing from 2 teachers. But what's better than getting feedback from 2 teachers is getting feedback from 3 or 4 teachers. I'm going to say this to all of you watching. If you are interested in prompts 3 or 5, Miss Rae is 100% someone you're going to want to go to for that feedback. And I know Miss Hillsland would be great with number 3 as well. And I everyone will be fine on all of them. But I know specifically Miss Rae is going to be killing it for 3 and 5. I'm going to be looking at 6. It's one that I definitely have a lot of interest in. And so I'm, and I think that we're all pretty open and available teachers, but really listen to what Ms. Rae said about if you want feedback, you have to start it before the weekend. You do. If you want feedback, and the best way to improve, the best way to grow as a writer and a thinker and a reader is to get feedback on these essays. And watch any video, go through any mini lesson. All these things that we're putting together for you are things we wish we could do in the classroom with you, but since we can't, take advantage of the things that are there. One of, I think, the nice things about having this all there is you can keep coming back to them.
Yeah.
In the classroom, it's hard to do that if you're not taking, great notes. And also sometimes I say things in one block that completely skip my mind in the next block. But here it's all there for you when you need it, and you can keep coming back to it. So, all right. I think that's it for the chat with Rae and Hadley this week.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching, friends. Have a great week writing. Enjoy it. Enjoy the writing process.
It's wonderful.
Bye.